not without its risks, particularly when employees get their hands on it. Okay, and for the purposes of today, I mean, this normally takes about 2 hours to cover this material, so I'm ramming it into 20 minutes. For the purposes of today, we're breaking it down into 3 broad headings. Okay, you've got straightforward acts of misconduct, you've got disclosure of confidential information, and you've got discriminatory, defamatory comments, and harassment and bullying. Okay, and we'll go through each of those in turn. I would just sort of start with a quick apology. Some of the language in some of this is a little bit blue for this early in the morning, but it does set the context for where the sort of cases are going and the differences between those. So I apologise for that. So a little bit of background information then for those who are unaware. The law of unfair dismissal. Firstly, an employee has to have 2 years service before they get protection from unfair dismissal. Okay, up to that point. With a few exceptions around discrimination, whistleblowing, things like that, you can dismiss employees for any of these things that crop up. As long as you pay the notice paid, that should be fine. But if they get over 2 years service, there are, broadly speaking, 3 hurdles for them to overcome. Firstly, you've got to identify the reason for the dismissal, and misconduct is one of the 5 potentially fair reasons to dismiss an employee. You've then got to follow a fair process. You've got to look at an investigation. You've got to hold a disciplinary hearing, give an appeal, etc., etc., etc. And then you've got to answer this question. Okay, and this is where we'll focus most of our attention today. Is the decision to dismiss a reasonable sanction? And there is this test, what's known as the band or range of reasonable responses an employer can take. Okay? To conceptualise it, it basically means that I can decide to dismiss an employee, you could decide to not dismiss them, only give them a final written warning. In the right context, that is perfectly fine and acceptable. So, for example, you walk into Nokolds offices and you hear staff effing and blinding, you would walk out pretty appalled and disgusted, because whereas this is professional practice, you expect a certain level. You walk into your car garage doing your MOT, you hear effing and blinding, you may still be appalled and offended, you may not go back there, but you can see the context is slightly different. The level of expectation is perhaps slightly different there. So that's basically what it means. One employer can make one decision, another employer can make another decision, and both can be right, which is fantastic from an employer's perspective. So within misconduct then, there are, when we're talking about social media, there are broadly 2 types. Okay, there is inappropriate behaviour exposed through social media, and there are derogatory comments about the workplace. So, if it's work-related misconduct, it's normally pretty easy to identify. We've got this case of Gill and SAS Ground Services. Gill was a customer services representative, and on her Facebook page she showed pictures, etc., of her modelling in her spare time, which SAS knew about, they were quite happy with, no problem with that whatsoever, in her spare time. She then signed herself off sick and went to the London Fashion Week, where she posted that she was auditioning 300 models. There were pictures of her parading along the catwalk. Unsurprisingly, they dismissed her for gross misconduct. Okay? Dismissal was a fair sanction. She'd clearly lied to the employer. There's no issue with that sort of stuff. So anything like that crops up, you're generally looking at gross misconduct. But we then get the issue where it's not directly work-related, okay? And there's this sort of grey area that we need to tackle. An employer can still take action, even if it's in their personal life, their personal thing they've done outside of work, if it makes their position untenable, or if it damages the business's reputation, okay? In these circumstances, you treat misuse of social media exactly the same way as you would any other form of misconduct, so disciplinary, hearing, etc., etc. Okay? What the tribunals have identified, however, is that there is a difference between an employee letting off steam through inoffensive comments and serious misconduct. We'll give a couple of examples of that. The first one, Young and Argos, she commented that her manager was as much use as a chocolate teapot. Okay, very serious comments. She'd been with the company 15 years, she had apologised, the dismissal was held to be unfair. Okay? The tribunal held that it was nothing more than workplace gossip or routine criticism of an employer. Now, I'm not entirely comfortable with this idea of routine criticism of an employer, but that's what the tribunal said, and that's what we've got to deal with. You contrast that then with this case of Dixon and GBI Limited. She described herself as working for the biggest bunch of wankers known to the place, full of ginger, fat wankers, sleeves, brown noses, and cokeheads. Okay? Now you can see different levels of the continuum. What she's got against ginger people, I don't know. Dismissal, fair. Okay? You can see the difference. And there is this continuum. There's no hard and fast rule. Again, remember that range of reasonable responses depending upon the circumstances. We then have this case of Walters and Asda stores, and Mrs. Walters commented on Facebook that she would like to hit customers on the back of her head with a pickaxe. Okay? Not a great advert for Asda's customers. The dismissal was held to be unfair. I think the tribunal took the view there was no realistic prospect of her walking through Asda with a pickaxe, murdering some of her customers. Having said that, I would just put out a disclaimer: if you're walking through Asda, you see a woman with a pickaxe, turn around, run away. Now, Mrs. Whittam was a team leader for a company that exclusively provided services to Volkswagen. That's more or less all they did. Okay. She commented, I think I work in a nursery and do not mean working with plants. She then put another comment up, take a lot for the bastards to grind me down. The employer argued that it damaged their reputation and in particular their relationship with Volkswagen. Remember, Volkswagen were their only source of business, or only meaningful source of business. Okay, she apologised, look, I just had a bad day, I shouldn't have done it, but I'm really sorry. The dismissal was held to be unfair. And importantly, it was held to be unfair because there was no evidence that the reputation and the relationship with Volkswagen had been negatively affected. Now, this case would have probably been found very differently if there had been a letter from Volkswagen saying, we've seen Miss Whittam has commented about this is outrageous, we're going to cancel your contract unless you deal with it. That would then be a very different set of circumstances. But just to turn around in the abstract and say, oh, it's impacted our reputation. No, there's got to be something more to it and something of more substance. Okay? The tribunal held that it was a mild comment from a relatively junior employee. Are Volkswagen really going to cancel an entire contract because she's put those two comments? Probably not. Okay, so that's why it was held to be unfair. Moving on then to the disclosure of confidential information, I would just note that I've limited this to during the employment relationship. There are different rules relating to confidential information once somebody leaves your employment, but we can talk about that later on if anybody wants to. But during employment then, we've got this case of Stevens and Halfords. Deputy store manager, he was off sick when they started a consultation about changing the working structure, the working pattern. They were basically asking them to do more weekends. Okay, he assumed that the information was confidential until the consultation was completed. Okay, he made that assumption. It was accepted that that was his genuine assumption, genuinely what he felt. Once the consultation had been fully completed, he remained off sick, but he commented, Halford's work is against working 3 out of 4 weekends. Okay, a buddy of his phoned him up and said, oh, I've just seen what you've posted. I'm not sure you should have done that. So he went away, he looked through the company policy, and it said not to make any public statement about the company. So he removed the post immediately. Okay, straight away removed it. It was only on for a day or two. Okay, he was dismissed for posting confidential information. Okay, the dismissal was held to be unfair. All right, he'd apologised. He had a clean disciplinary record. He'd obviously removed it as soon as he'd realised his error. That's not to say I don't think that perhaps a disciplinary sanction might have been appropriate, but it's just said dismissal was excessive in this particular case. Okay? Compare that then to Xaver and the Dorchester Hotel. Xaver worked in the banqueting suite, and as all employees at the Dorchester, they had very, very strong confidentiality obligations in their employment contract for obvious reasons. Their customers get up to all sorts of nonsense, I'm sure. Frustrated at operational inefficiencies, Xaver set up a blog and started recording all the things that he felt were going wrong and how he would have fixed them, okay? With a genuine intention that he was looking to improve things. After he'd had this up and running for a little while, he emailed his manager saying, look, this is what I've done, I think this would be a really good way, encourage staff to do it so we can fix things, make things better, give a better service. The blog did, however, mention colleagues, it named the hotel, and he was dismissed for breach of that confidentiality obligation. The employment tribunal were very sympathetic because he clearly had the hotel's best interests at heart. But it was in the public domain. It was a clear violation of his very express confidentiality obligations, and therefore the dismissal was held to be fair. And again, from our perspective as employers, you want to be looking at, if you've got information you want protected, put it in your employment contract, make sure it's there, so it's very clear, and you can rely on this and similar cases to protection. The sort of factors then to be taken into account. This is not an exhaustive list, it's just the sort of things to think about. You've got length of service, has the employer been named, has any individual been offended or identified in the comments, has any confidential information been disclosed, and genuinely important confidential information. Not all business information is necessarily of the same value. How long were the comments on the offending page? How many viewings have there been? Has the employer's reputation been damaged, and can you evidence that? Have any apologies been given, and has it breached your social media policy? Dealing with, and as I say, there will be others depending on the circumstances, but that's a broad list. Moving on then to bullying and harassment. Okay, now cyberbullying is essentially harassment that is carried out through social media channels, as one would expect, and is a real problem for employers for two key reasons. Often it takes place away from work, in their personal time, so there's, is it work related, is it not? And it's quite difficult to prevent because you're not always friends with your employees on Facebook or things like that, and frankly you wouldn't want to be. So it can be very difficult to even know that it's taking place. Okay? But it is easier to establish that a dismissal is fair when you've got an effective bullying and harassment policy in place, normally as part of or an annex to your equal opportunities policy. What then is harassment for our purposes? And I'll take the definition out of the Equality Act 2010. It is any unwanted conduct related to a relevant protected characteristic, so for example sex, race, age, etc., that has the purpose or the effect, and that's important. We often get, oh well, it was just a joke, it was jokes, come on, get over it, it wasn't serious. Even if it doesn't have the purpose of doing these things, if it has the effect of violating an individual's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for him or her, that is harassment, whether you intended it or the employee intended it or not. Okay? And it is particularly of concern for employers because of the concept of what's known as vicarious liability. That means that employers are responsible for the actions of their employees during work or connected to work. Okay? So, a couple of cases then. Taggart and Teletech. Taggart posted on Facebook, quick question, who in Teletech has A not tried to? F, she does get around. Okay? Exactly. Unsurprisingly, the dismissal was held to be fair. It showed a vulgar distaste for A. Quite bizarrely, he refused to withdraw the comments when he was invited to, refused to apologise. Well, it's true. All right, fine, okay. And it was a breach of their anti-harassment policy. Also, this case of Otomeu and Carphone Warehouse. Other employees took his phone without permission, accessed the Facebook page, changed his status in the time-honoured tradition of schoolboys to finally come out the closet, I'm gay and proud. I mean, it is just like being at school, isn't it? He was not gay, and importantly, he didn't believe that his colleagues thought he was gay. Okay? But still, off he went, brought a claim for harassment based on sexual orientation, and the employment tribunal found in his favour. Okay? It was an unwanted intrusion into his private life, and the employer was liable because it happened at work. They stole his phone, or took his phone whilst at work. Okay? So again, you can see how these things can really catch employers out. There's no suggestion that Carphone Warehouse authorised this or encouraged it, but it can catch you out. The final point then before I wrap up this morning is we often get this question, oh, my human right, my right to privacy, I've got a right to freedom of expression, I can say what I like. No, basically. Taggart, we've discussed, it was soundly rejected in that. Chris, in that case, the comments were only to his friends, only to a few dozen friends. But the tribunal found that there was no control on the comments once they had been posted. You might only post them to, say, 20 of your friends, but once they've got it, they could repost it, they could share it, they can send it on wherever. So once you have posted on social media, the general rule is you have absolutely no expectation that those comments will remain private and confidential. Okay? There have been a few exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that argument is soundly rejected, and employers can rely on anything that is posted on Facebook, if appropriate to do so. Just wrapping up then, a few little points just for you to take away with you. Obviously, we've sort of rattled through a few cases there very, very quickly. Contract of employment, most important document you have in regard to your employees. Make sure it's right, make sure it's up to date. Particular things like confidentiality obligations are up to date. If you include an indicative list of the types of misconduct that may amount to gross misconduct, then you want to have breaches of your social media policy in there so that you're clear on that. Look at your policies and procedures, in particular social media policy. If you want to turn around to your employees and say, no, you can't use social media, you can't mention us, you can't do anything about it, that is perfectly fine. Okay? Equally, if you say, yeah, have free reign, crack on with it, don't worry about it, do what you want to do, that is fine. And anywhere in between is fine. But you've got to decide, and you've got to be clear to your employees as to what is expected and what will get them into trouble if they do it. Okay? Because if you're not clear, they will push those grey boundaries as far as they possibly can. Make sure your disciplinary procedure is up to date, ACAS code compliant. Make sure you've got an email IT policy that makes it clear that you can monitor email access, you can monitor what they're looking at on the internet, you can ban use of social media during working hours, things like that can all help. And again, make sure that's in place. Equal opportunities policy, again, make sure that's in place. It's your only real defence to a claim of harassment, that you've got a policy in place that is effective, that you follow through on. And ensure consistency, so make sure that you treat like offences by similar employees in a like manner. So that's it for today. I've sort of rattled through that. I know I'm happy, if there's time, I'm happy to take questions, or equally I'm happy to hang around at the end if anybody's got anything they want to